Now, restorative justice eludes Chris Hani's family yet again after the High Court in Pretoria dismissed an application for leave to appeal the decision to release his killer Janus Walusz. Chris Hani's widow, Dimpho, says that they will take the matter to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Dimpho embased the judge Nicolene Jansen van Nieuwenhuizen, saying the judge is not God and that the family will explore other courts in the matter. Tonight, on the debate, we asked, should the murderer of an icon be allowed parole? We joined in the studio by Cliff Gordon, he's a parolee expert, and Alex Mdakane, Young Communist League South Africa Provincial Secretary in Gauteng. To both of you, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, this has been a very soft and sore and tender spot in the South African history in the lead up to the hard fought for democracy. I remember being in my second year in varsity when Chris Hani was murdered, and what could have potentially erupted from there. So in that context, Alex, I'll start with you. That as the Young Communist League, what is it that you are holding on to, particularly when it comes to the law in the case of paroling Janus Walusz?
Well, we recognize the law in South Africa as a necessary conduit to achieving justice, because the law and justice for us as young communists are two separate entities that mutually reinforce one another. So we recognize the law as a necessary conduit to achieve justice, but the application of the law must take into consideration the prevailing objective material conditions on the ground. Now, in this instance, the judge erred, in many instances by putting her personal views across. She erred in a sense that she did not take into consideration both the political and historical context of the case. This was no ordinary murder. This was a murder of an icon for socialism internationally, not only in the country. It happened just on the verge of us getting our 1994 democratic breakthrough. Of course, as you alluded to, the issue of us almost going the route of a civil war, that too should have been taken into consideration. But unfortunately, the judge decided to err across her personal views, which are, in our view as the Young Communist League, are prejudicial.
We take your calls at home on 011-542-2186, and you can tweet on @ANN7TV to join the debate. Just, Clifford, from a legal point of view and the parole conditions, I'm no expert, but there's certain prescriptions that if you've served your time and you are eligible for parole, that those would obviously be explored. In this case of Janus Walusz, do you think that he's, the law had followed the proper steps?
Well, the first step to a parolee getting parole is, has he served, or she for that matter, have they served the correct amount of time? So for Mr. Walusz, it would have been, in his case, 20 years, because he was sentenced before the new act came into being, and he would have been considered by the parole board. Then after that, the minister has the discretion to take the parole board's decision into account and to say, hang on a second, the parole board did not consider X factor or Y factor, and I believe that the parole board was wrong in that circumstance, or they were correct. In the case of other parolees, he said the parole board's decision was correct. And to take into account the various factors listed into the Act, the nature of the offence, for example, the length of the time the sentence was given. In Janus Walusz's case, originally the death sentence, which was commuted to life in prison. The rehabilitation of the offender is also taken into account, various other factors. But in Walusz's case, the rehabilitation aspect
so, but everything was done according to book?
So it was done according to the book, in other words.
Oh, okay.
If the minister in this case decided we don't want to give him parole, then what happened was then Janus Walusz's attorneys went to court, and then they asked the judge to review the decision of the minister. All
right, let's take a caller. Zanele, thanks so much for calling, and what's your view?
Hi, Cindy, how are you?
I'm well, thanks for asking.
It's Zanele from Janus.
Yes, ma'am.
Cindy, I just want to make one point. I wish people could understand the way prisons are run. correctional services. I'm even surprised that the minister is trying to appeal. In prison, after a certain time, you get parole. No matter who you killed or no matter what you did, at a certain period you get parole. So the way I feel is very unfair on Janus' side, because he served his time even more than what he was supposed to sit. Because in prison, after a certain period, you go to the parole office.
Yeah.
And they give
But
you
Zanele,
parole.
obviously we're not speaking about any ordinary circumstances and situation. And I mean, on the side of the family as well, I think there is some level of consideration and compassion that we need to extend to us, understand even the Communist Party and, you know, why is it that they feel this is unfair, that this is a miscarriage of justice. We cannot just rush aside people's emotion on that point. But I appreciate your call. We have Vusi as well. Hello, Vusi.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I can't complain. Thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. Cindy, my concern is one, okay? What I'm saying is that people should attack the judgment of the judge, because judges are there to interpret the law. Nothing more, nothing less, okay? They take emotions aside and just interpret the law. That is what they do, okay? So people must stop attacking the judge. Otherwise, we're inviting a state of anarchy in South Africa here. When somebody says that the judge is not a god, it is wrong, okay? The judgment is wrong. You should be saying that the judgment is wrong. We need to look into it. In any event, the law provides alternative to that. There are other avenues that are open to people. So they must not attack the judges.
Yeah.
They're creating a state of anarchy. It is wrong.
All right, thanks so much. And Alex, that's what we heard from one of your members in court. His name eludes me now, that there is polarization in our system, and particularly the judiciary hasn't been transformed. We need to eradicate racism, implying that by virtue of being white, that Judge Janus van Nieuwenhuizen had made the judgment based on racial perspective. Is that your view?
By the way, anarchy is organized chaos. So the absence of visible anarchy does not mean that there's no anarchy currently in the country. And the judgment, as issued by the judge, Janus van something, etc., speaks to the nuances that still exist in terms of the ownership of the means of production, the economic patterns, and those are also expressed through our Chapter 9 institutions in terms of how they arrive to particular judgments, how they arrive to particular conclusions, and as far as the will of the majority is concerned. Of course, the issue of parole requires that the victim must have repented. The victim must be willing to come on board and disclose the full truth and nothing but the truth. Janus Walusz and Clive W. Lewis, by the way, were given ample opportunity to come to the front, to come to the fore, and disclose who their co-conspirators were, whom they were working with, etc. By the way, we also want to further ask, we've got questions about the judge. We'll speak to that question later. But we also want to bring to your attention,
Cindy.
Certain things, of course, I almost said Comrade Cindy. The mere fact that the judge at the Bar News Pretoria Bar, in her profile, she disclosed that in 1990, she entered the bar in 1991. Janus Walusz's first appearance in court, was in her court where she was a prosecutor. She mentions.
So how does that make her biased?
She
or
explicitly mentions
subjective?
That as to what are the reasons behind her mentioning that in her profile begs a lot of questions. Of course, that is why then as the Young Communist League, we believe that her judgment was not fair, the conclusion was not fair, and the fact that she did not grant the minister leave to appeal her earlier judgment begs much.
Yeah.
Look at the Oscar Pistorius case, for instance.
Yes, we know that the judge...
Judge Masipa allowed the leave to appeal. Why is she not allowing the leave to appeal?
Yes, correct. That it could be, we could see a different result if the case were to be taken to the Supreme Court of Appeal. What do you think, Clifford, is the likelihood of that?
Well, it's a matter here of a panel of judges in the Supreme Court of Appeal considering the petition. Or even the appeal might even go straight to the Constitutional Court, depending on the minister's preference in this case. But the panel of judges, they each get a copy of the petition, they will consider it, and between them they will decide, do we want to grant this petition and allow leave to appeal to us, or do we want to leave the matter? I think in such a sensitive matter, it's very likely that they will allow that leave to appeal to go to a higher court, just to get clarity on whether Judge Janus van Nieuwenhuizen's judgment was in fact correct, whether she did apply the law, whether she did have bias, etc. And therefore, I think the Supreme Court appeal in this particular matter will actually allow the matter to go further because of the political sensitivities, because of the national interest in the case.
So you think after the Supreme Court of Appeal we might just have the parole revoked then for Walusz?
Yeah. So in other words, once the petition is allowed, or then the parole will be the judgment of Janus van Nieuwenhuizen will then be suspended, and then Janus Walusz will have to remain in prison. But as things stand now, without a petition in place, they might have to.
All right, talk us through the process then, Alex, from the Young Communists. Once the appeal, of course, has been heard in the Supreme Court of Appeals, what happens next, based on whether it's in favor of the appeal or not?
Well, let me first indicate that a parole is not a right. It's not a right but a privilege. And in this instance, the judge should have taken into consideration the views of the victim more than the views of the offender. Right, we are taking the matter up, of course, using all legal routes available to us. We don't want him to rot in jail. We want him to tell us the truth. Who were the people that sent him to kill Comrade Chris Hani? That's all we want from him. But should he fail to disclose those who sent him to kill Comrade Chris Hani, we'll do all that is necessary to physically or otherwise extract the truth from him. And that is not a threat, it's a promise. Not so long ago we were told that Clive W. Lewis will be dying in less than a month. When is he dying? We're still waiting for him to die. We also want to send him medication that will assist the process of him, relieving him of the pain he might be suffering from. We're told the man is in great pain. If the Justice Department could assist us with his exact location, we can go there and give him the necessary medication to relieve him of his pain.
Yeah. Let's take Johan. Johan, thanks so much for your call. And what's your view?
Well, I just think he served his time. I think really he's repented, and he's set 22 years. I mean, he's got to be set free. Let him go on with his life.
But what do you say?
Let us forgive what happened in the past. In the apartheid years, let's forgive and let Wallace go free and let him live his life.
Johan, may I ask you a question? Isn't it just easier if you're not directly first-hand involved? I mean, we're talking about the family and children of Chris Hani here. For you and I, it may just be another chapter in our history, a very brutal history at that. But for the families, is it in our place to then say, let's forgive, let's move on and forget?
Well, even if Wallace stays in prison, it's not going to bring back Chris Hani. It's not going to make things better. Why toy and go on about him not repenting? Who's the judge there then?
All right,
Who's
Johan.
the judge on that?
Point taken.
Let him go free and let him live his life.
Thank you for your call.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Professor Shadrack Gutro, constitutional analyst, joins us on the line. Professor Gutro, thanks so much for joining us. Just on looking on the appeal, particularly from the Minister of Justice, was it unreasonable for the Minister to want to appeal the parole justice order, rather? Professor Gutro?
Well, I think that, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. What I'm saying here in response to your question is that the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, because we have to mention the whole title, this matter deals with both justice and the question of the powers within the correctional services part of justice in our country, that yes, the minister could test anything, but I believe that we have to start from the constitutional foundations of the country, that there is equality before the law, there's the rule of law, and from those principles, we then deal with the present matter of has there been a process which has tried to adhere to the rule of law in the country. And in my view, yes, there has been. And the judge was correct in really indicating or pronouncing that we cannot have two systems of justice, one for a special group of persons in society and one for the ordinary person. That will not be equality before the law and the rule of law. So from that point of view, the judge was quite correct.
All right, Professor,
And
so what you're
the
saying, if I
arguments that
understand
were put before...
If I'm understanding you, you're saying that the treatment of Walusz is more political than what it is legal in this sense. It's more about who he killed and not necessarily going according to the law.
I think that is what I'm really trying to explain, that we are now moving into the area of who was killed. Of course, Chris Hani is a national hero. He will remain so, mainly because he did not really transition into the era of leadership in the country, where even some of the people we thought were revolutionaries became people grabbing public resources, accumulating wealth, becoming really petty bourgeois accumulators. He didn't go through that process because his killing before 1994 prevented him from being in that group. So we don't know. So people, we idealize him and hoping that if he was there, the police now would be better, people would feel better. So emotionally, one can understand why people say, don't allow the killers of Chris Hani to come out, because they killed somebody who would have led the country to greater heights than what we have now.
All right,
which is not very high.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor Shadrack Gutsha, our constitutional expert. We have Nhlapo on the line. Thanks for your call, Nhlapo. And what's your comment or question?
Yeah, I'm very actually disappointed with ANC, SACP, and COSATU. They always want the law to go their own way. Shabir Sheikh did not even serve enough time to be granted parole, but he was released. And then for me, Walusz has served enough time to be granted parole. We cannot have two systems of justice which will serve elites, politicians, with a special treatment. There must be a system of justice for them. And then for poor people, such men who were killed in Mdakane, where nobody is being jailed for massacring those people, ANC say nothing about that. And then just recently, our president was found to have violated his oath of office, and ANC is preaching forgiveness. Let ANC, SACP forgive Walusz if they are saying that South Africans must forgive Jacob Zuma. So let's have a system of justice. Walusz have served 23 years, that's enough. Shabir Sheikh not even serve a year. He's released, nobody's complaining. So we cannot have two systems of justice which will serve ANC's needs, SACP's needs. Walusz has served enough time, let him be released.
And Nhlapo, thanks so much for your call. What's your response, Alex?
I will speak on behalf of the ANC. I speak on behalf of the working class of South Africa. Comrade Chris Hani was not a national hero. He was an international icon for socialism. And I must state that point clearly. When they killed Chris Hani, they killed many hopes and dreams of the working class peoples of the world. What he represented, I mean, look, on the hit list, the first hit list that was issued, there was the names of Comrade Mandela, quite a number of comrades were on that hit list. Then the list was reordered, and the name of Comrade Chris Hani, of course, featured again amongst the second list, and he was the first one to be killed, and nobody was killed after that. So we've got a lot of questions to ask. We're in the current state of affairs because there are certain compromises that were made in the 1994 democratic breakthrough, and we know very well that some of those compromises, especially Section 25 of our Constitution, which seeks to maintain the status quo in terms of property relations. He was totally against it. He wanted land to be in the hands of the people.
Alex, I just want to get a legal perspective. How do we incorporate, especially the historical dynamics of the country, and to deal with the spaces? There were gaps with the Truth and Reconciliation process that had left open wounds that have just gone to infest. Clifford, so from a legal point of view, do you think that the judiciary, there's a place for consideration of such?
Well, the TRC process recommended that certain of the perpetrators that weren't granted amnesty or that didn't come forward should be pursued by the legal system and should be brought to justice. So that would be one way of dealing with a situation whereby the people that weren't granted amnesty. In this particular case, Janus, Walusz and Clive Derby-Lewis had already been tried and convicted for their crimes. So there was no further judicial process you could apply to them. Maybe to other perpetrators you could. I mean, I've had clients on parole from various political backgrounds, from the old regime, from the liberation movements, from just normal criminals, and they've all been subjected to the same process of parole, for example, and I believe that the justice process in general should probably be set in motion.
All right, let's take our last caller, and that's Councillor Leonard. Hello, thanks for your patience. And what's your view?
Hi, thank you. I think, we need to look at this in the sense and compare it to the late President Mandela, who was charged for treason and released after 27 years. In this case, President Mandela was not a killer. President Mandela was charged for treason for a just cause. Janus Walusz committed a murder which could have turned this country into a bloodbath. Secondly, I think that he hasn't spoken the truth. He needs to reveal all before parole is given to him. Everybody deserves freedom, but he needs to reveal all. The whole who assisted him, all that must come out. And then the family of Chris Hani needs to be satisfied that this man has spoken the truth, and they can then recommend a parole for him.
Councillor Leonard, you'll be the voice of reason for this evening's debate. Thanks indeed for your contribution. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have. But just in 30 seconds, Alex, what's your hope going forward, and especially for South Africa to understand, for those that don't know the contribution that Comrade Chris Hani had made to this country?
This was no ordinary case. Political and historical context should have been taken into consideration. Chris Hani's murder was no ordinary murder, and we'll do everything in our power as a young communist league of the South African Communist Party to get to the bottom of the truth. If it means exposing some of our own within the alliance, then so be it.
All right, and lastly, Clifford, just that there's no conspiracy from the judiciary, and especially on the part of the judge. Of course, you can't speak on her behalf, but just a sense of confidence in the legal system.
As I've said before, judges are human. They make mistakes. That's why we have appeals. We had Judge Taskelson saying exactly that in his judgment in Late versus Mandela. And judges do bring their own baggage to a certain degree to a judgment. And That's why they have to be very careful and balanced in ruling, and that's why we have a process of appeal.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your insight and for coming in this evening. We were speaking to Professor Shadrack Guto, constitutional analyst. Cliff Gordon is a parolee expert, and Alice Mdakane is a Young Communist League South Africa provincial secretary in Gauteng. Thanks indeed for everybody that's called in as well. We'll take a quick ad break. Stevie B is up next with BizSense.